Welcome to Latino Victory's Substack. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Latino Justice, formerly known as PearlDEF, the Puerto Rico Legal Defense and Education Forum um, Fund. And Miranda, you lead a litigation practice within Latino Justice that I think is very relevant in today's fight for our democracy. So I'm super excited to have you join. And thank you for taking the time. We're going to jump right on it. Tell us a little bit about the work that Latino Justice has been doing, and specifically what's happening at the Supreme Court.
Sure. Well, Latino Justice is a 50-year-old organization, and fighting for our democracy and specifically Latino voting power, protecting it and expanding it has been a part of our bread and butter for decades. Some of the signature issues that Latino Justice has been a part of are language access. And so that's enforcing protections under the Federal Voting Rights Act and some state laws that protect the right for Spanish language voting materials and assistance. A hallmark of that is our work with 4E. That is a specific provision of the Voting Rights Act that protects the right of Puerto Rican voters on the mainland USA. And in addition to that, there's Section 203 and Section 208, which we also fold into not only our litigation work, but our election protection work. We have an advocacy arm of our organization that is on the ground on Election Day, early voting, and Election Day itself. We are monitoring for compliance with language assistance laws as well as other aspects of the Voting Rights Act. Our team is staffed by bilingual members of our team, or we partner with other community organizations that have bilingual staff, and we are offering that assistance to voters as they go into the polls, making sure that they know they have a right to bring someone in with them if they need someone to translate for them or for whatever reason. And so our litigation also focuses on barriers to voting. So whether it's fighting the closure of polling sites in Black and Brown communities, whether it's fighting restrictions on early voting hours or drop boxes, things of that nature, Latino Justice is there fighting that. And unfortunately, we have some repeat bad actors. I think I'm on my third year suing Florida. um, and we also
I wonder why.
um, and we've also seen some trends with attempts to really targeting of third-party voter registration organizations. As you know, there's a voter registration gap in our community compared to white voters. Our community is not registered at the same rates. And it really takes trusted messengers to go into those spaces and educate people about the process, about their rights. And we've seen a lot of increasing attacks on the ability of organizations like our clients Hispanic Federation, Poder Latinx, Unidos US to be able to do that work. And so those are other types of challenges that we've been a part of with my litigation team.
Yes, and certainly we've seen the kind of oppression coming out of the administration as it
Mhm.
relates to all aspects of our civic life as people of color. Certainly, that's a whole nother presentation that we have to talk about. As it relates to freedom of the press and censorship, and also the self censorship that is happening across our communities. And as we're talking about voter registration, I know many organizations right now are having second thoughts about voter registration efforts in communities that where desperately it is needed, precisely because they understand they will become a target for the administration as a result of efforts to engage our communities. So we'll get into it a little bit. I know right now one of the things we definitely want to discuss are is the Supreme Court decision that's expected to come down any minute now on Section 2 of the Civil Rights Act, which really goes to the bread and butter of our representation and our ability to um, have folks that look like us, that stand up for our values and our needs, represent our communities. And so I know that you're part of that fight. But taking a step back, just what are you seeing in terms of the decisions coming down from the Supreme Court? What is the general sense that organizations like Latino Justice, who are fighting the good fight, are getting? I will tell you, sometimes when I read the dissenting opinions on some of these decisions, specifically by Justice Sonia Sotomayor, I can almost sense impotence, right? Because we know that right now the Supreme Court is controlled by a right wing majority. So, what is your general sense on the decision that's going to come down, and also what's happening at the Supreme Court right now?
I think to start talking about Calais and to start talking about the trend in the Supreme Court of the attacks of the Voting Rights Act, it's important to have just a base level foundation on voter suppression. And so voter suppression comes in many flavors. There's vote dilution, which is the subject of Calais, but there's also vote denial. An example of that would be, like I said earlier, closing early voting sites in a Black and brown neighborhood, but not in the white neighborhood. There's also language assistance and English only voting practices, which can be a form of white supremacy as well. And so there's a whole constellation. There's voter intimidation. There's a lot of different flavors of voter suppression. Calais is focused on one of those, and that's vote dilution. Vote dilution occurs in the redistricting process. Every 10 years, the census tells us how our demographics have changed. And as you know, it's no secret that Black and brown voters are increasing, both as a proportion of the state demographics in general and also in whole numbers. And so the purpose of redistricting, of the map drawers of each state legislature, or if they have a separate independent commission, is to make sure that they are upholding the constitutional right for there to be one person, one vote. I want my vote to count as much as your vote. It's not fair if someone's vote counts more than my vote. That's the goal of it. In principle, it's supposed to be voters electing the representatives, not representatives deciding who their electorate's going to be. However, the people that are drawing these maps are often the incumbents. They've got some skin in the game. And unfortunately,
Or party controlled hacks, frankly.
and historically, this has been weaponized against Black and brown voting communities. And the record is full of intentional instances of cracking and packing Black and brown voters into districts in a way that makes their votes count less than white voters. Let's talk about each of those. So an example of cracking would be, say you have a state where they have enough Black and brown voters to constitute their own district, where they could have a majority and have an opportunity to elect their candidate of a choice. Instead of giving that community that their own district to be able to exercise their political power, they cut them in half, or they cut them in fourths, or they cut them in other ways, so that they don't constitute enough of a voting influence in any of the districts for them to be able to elect their candidate of choice. That's called cracking. Another form of vote dilution is packing. So say you have enough Black and brown voters to constitute two districts where they could each have a majority minority, have the ability to elect their candidate of choice. Instead of giving them those two districts, the map drawers pack them, almost all of them, into one district, concentrate as much as possible. Like, okay, we're going to give them this one. But instead of giving them the second one, they're going to make sure that those people, there's not enough of them to constitute the second district. And so that's packing them into one instead of giving them the ability to constitute majority in as many districts as would be appropriate. Let's go to Louisiana. In the 2020 census, it revealed that the Black community of Louisiana constituted about 1/3 of its population. There's 9 congressional seats in Louisiana. The map that was passed only cracked and packed the Black Louisiana electorate so that they only had one Black majority district. And it should be two. So naturally, there was a lawsuit, and I have to pause here and make sure I'm giving flowers to NAACP, Legal Defense and Education Fund, ACLU National. Latino Justice is not a part of this lawsuit, but I'm talking about it passionately, not because I'm a part of the co-counsel team, but because the outcome of this decision impacts Latino Justice's work when it comes to vote dilution going forward. All eyes of the voting rights community are on the outcome of Calais right now. So what is actually at issue in Calais is not that initial suit. The lawsuit by the Black community in Louisiana is actually a lawsuit called Robinson. And that case in Robinson resulted in a finding that, yes, indeed, that bad map that was passed, that challenged map in Louisiana that was passed in, I think, 2022, violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits vote dilution because they were cracking and packing the Black voting power. So when that happens, as is supposed to happen, the legislature, the court tells the legislature, we're not going to tell you exactly where to draw the lines, but we're telling you that we know to comply with the Voting Rights Act, you need to come up with a map that has two majority Black districts. And Louisiana did do that. Subsequently, a group of self-described non-Black voters. And if anyone's confused about that, I encourage you to see the New York Times article that discusses the identities of the plaintiffs at work here and interest groups at work. They challenged that remedial map. And that is now the case that is before the Supreme Court. And it's odd that there's a challenge of a remedial map, first of all. And it's especially odd that the Supreme Court heard oral argument already. I believe it was back in March was the original oral argument. And then in around June, they said, actually, we would like to have it re-argued. And they expanded the issue. They said, what we want the re-argument to focus on, and this happened last week, is whether or not Louisiana's intentional creation of two Black majority districts is constitutional. Does that violate the 14th and the 15th Amendments? And just taking a step back from a common sense perspective, it's really asking the question, is it racist to remedy proven racism? And
Right.
it just not speaking as a lawyer, just thinking about if someone is harmed, doesn't it matter the identity of who was harmed when you're thinking about how to respond to that, how to fix the situation? But going to one of your earlier questions, what's going on with the Supreme Court? They're entertaining this. They're asking these questions. It's not a shock. There were some signals put out in the last year that this was vulnerable to these types of attacks. And that is why this is just like a quintessential impact litigation case. It's not the outcome of this doesn't just determine the fate of Black voters in Louisiana. It determines the ability of all of our communities to continue to bring challenges to maps that crack and pack our communities that are having a discriminatory impact on us. And so it's giving a lot of heartburn to a lot of us.
For sure. And the fact is, as you mentioned, that it will have an impact for potentially generations to come. There are two things here. Well, actually, there are quite a few things that stand out to me, but there are two things that I would love your take on. One is certainly we've seen political redistricting efforts across the country mid-census, right? And you talk about redistricting being an activity that's done as a result of the decennial census. So what we're seeing really is a comprehensive approach to limiting voting rights for our communities, not just in the courts, but also in legislatures and at the ballot box. And so I'm curious as to if there's a comprehensive approach that Latino justice is taking towards all of these different angles in which our community is under attack. And then also, as it relates to Calais and Louisiana and the impact that it will have in other court cases, is there anything else this term that we should be concerned about as it relates to voting rights and potential implications from this particular case?
Unfortunately, yes. Um, I think one of the other examples I'd like to share with you and your viewers is the Turtle Mountain case. This is a case that is most being championed by NARF, the Native American Rights Fund, where they're in the Eighth Circuit, and um, their challenge was the Eighth Circuit is saying that their challenge does not win because there's no private right of action to enforce the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. That
You went mute there.
who
There we go.
oh, excuse me.
You were muted for a second, but go ahead.
Oh,
You're good.
so the Turtle Mountain case is fundamentally about whether or not there's a private right of action to enforce the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Um, the Eighth Circuit held that only the Department of Justice is the only actor that can bring lawsuits alleging, for example, violations of Section 2. But the Voting Rights Act is not just Section 2, it's also, as I mentioned, the other language access protections. And it's of vital importance for all of Latino Justice's clients to continue to be able to have to bring challenges. The communities are the ones who are aware of where the harm is. They are the ones who are motivated to bring these lawsuits. The civil rights organizations, we have decades-long practice of doing it because there is a vacuum. The Department of Justice, even when it is motivated to be prosecuting these violations of voting law, does not have the capacity to do all of them. And as we have seen, unfortunately, the Department of Justice can be politicized depending on different administrations. We're 501c3. We are nonpartisan. Voting rights are nonpartisan. This is an issue that we should all as Americans be behind and making sure that these protections are upheld. And it's not only the harm is not only the plaintiffs themselves who will lose this important tool. The Voting Rights Act is a deterrent. It's a big stick. It's out there. So it's not, I think we will see a huge increase in discriminatory maps being passed by legislatures who feel that they no longer fear the expense and the humiliation of being called out for discriminatory apportionment practices.
For sure. And when do you think we will see a decision on this?
With Calais, let's talk about Calais first. So,
Yes.
although Louisiana did ask that the court provide their opinion before the end of this year, it is unlikely that we will have a decision before the primary in Louisiana, which I believe is April of next year. So there's no like set deadline. The Supreme Court does not have a deadline of, okay, by this date they have to give it, but probably at some point next year is what we're expecting. And it's very important that in the interim, we don't let opponents of voting rights overplay their card, overplay that hand. The show must go on, and until we hear otherwise, Section 2 is still good law. It is still enforceable. My team is coming off the heels of a victory in Nassau County, New York, where we road tested the New York Voting Rights Act. That is not the Federal Voting Rights Act, that's a State Voting Rights Act, which are of increasing importance in a time where the Federal Voting Rights Act is under increasing attack. States are stepping up and creating state level protections that not only reinforce with a state level protection that is parallel to what the Federal Voting Rights Act provides, they go beyond what those federal minimums are. And I've been very excited to be a part of that, not only with litigation, but also with advocacy work. Latino Justice is a national expert on language access provisions in state voting rights acts. And we are very excited about the ability to work with states to create broader protections for limited English proficient voters. And as I mentioned, these are really a nonpartisan issue. There are limited English proficient voters on both sides of the aisle. And I really believe that decision makers and legislators should be motivated to be protecting the ability of their constituents to be exercising their right to vote.
Certainly, and I think that we've seen in many different instances at this moment in time where we all live, where the states have had to step up to increase protections where the federal government has failed. I'm curious. Two things. One is certainly. Uh, is there work that you're doing at the state level with folks, as you mentioned, advocacy that viewers and Latino Victory and other organizations can engage in? Are there specific states where you have concerns, where there's a time sensitive activation that folks perhaps would want to support? And then also for the average person who's watching, what kinds of things can they do to protect themselves, their families, their voting rights, and then certainly support the work that's happening?
Thank you. I think now more than ever, we need to take so seriously our fundamental right to vote and protect it from both the micro level to the macro level. So, starting with ourselves, making sure you and your loved ones have a voting plan. Especially young people who might be newer to voting, or family members or loved ones who may be out of practice with voting, and supporting them with that very practical step. Also, there are things we can do at the federal level as well. So there's the John Lewis Voting Rights Act has been a bill. It hasn't been passed, and it's not going to be passed without a groundswell, without an outcry from across America. And so I would encourage everyone to be um, making sure that their representatives know that this is something that is very important to them, and be putting pressure on them to pass this vital legislation. And that advocacy step is something that the court did when they gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which is the pre-clearance provision, which made sure that certain bad actors that always are known for voter suppression need to kind of make sure that their changes to their electoral systems pass the smell test at the DOJ. And so when that was gutted, the Supreme Court said, "Well, Congress can reauthorize this." And so, really, don't let Congress off the hook, and resist the urge to feel defeated. Regardless of what comes down in Calais, we're going to be judged with how we showed up in this moment. And those of us in our community don't have the same level of privilege necessarily. So I'm a U.S. citizen. I have job security. Not everybody in my family or my loved ones have that. So my ability to show up in this moment is different, and I do recognize that. But each of us in our own way, it's a call to action right now. And so, por lo menos, start, even if you can't vote. I think you're even a more profound messenger about why it's important right now. Talk to your legislators about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. For state level advocacy, be supporting state level voting rights acts. Our team is involved in Florida. You might think that's not gonna you might be surprised to hear that there's a live bill there, but still, yes, yes, there is, and we're there. And there's many other states that have either passed them or are thinking of passing them or are creating them. You can support Latino justice. Legal Defense Fund is a big proponent of State Voting Rights Act as well, as is the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, NARF. And I would say that your first stop with keeping abreast of all of these developments is the Voting Rights Working Group. That's a group of, I think, about the top 11 voting rights, civil rights organizations out there, and we have a cohort. And so, if you need just one place to go, pay attention to the Voting Rights Working Group. Of course, Latino Justice would appreciate your support as well. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan. We have social media handles. You can keep in touch with us that way.
Thank you so much, Miranda Galindo, from Supervising Counsel at Latino Justice. And folks can find you at latinojustice.org. And I want to thank everyone who joined this live stream. My name is Catherine Pichardo. I'm president and CEO at Latino Victory. We are an organization that builds Latino political power at all levels of government so that our voices and values are represented in the policies that move our country forward. Certainly, you can find us at latinovictory.org. And the fact is that in this moment in our country, none of us can sit this out. We see our communities under attack. We see voting rights under attack. And so I am grateful to you, Miranda, for this timely update on what's happening at the Supreme Court with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We're going to stay tuned because we know there's not a decision yet, but one is expected that could potentially have greater implications for our communities moving forward. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.
Un placer.
Gracias. Bye-bye, everybody.